Hello, my little mathematicians. Today we're going to explore inequalities. An inequality you can kind of think of as a type of an equal sign. It separates part of the equation and you use it to compare something. Like one thing is greater than another or it's less than another. And I know that in the past we had said, oh, less than means subtract and more than means add. So you're like, how do I tell the difference if it's saying 3 minus 7 or 3 is less than 7? How do I tell the difference? Well, did you hear that slight difference of what I just read right now? I said 3 less 7, that's 3 minus 7, versus 3 is less than 7. So is a form of an equal sign, right? And if it says is less than, then it's a less than sign. So same thing for is more than, it would be a greater than sign. So maybe 7 is greater than 3. All right, let's go ahead and differentiate all the different signs. This one right here, we've kind of already established, is a less than sign. You'll know that that's the sign to put if you see the words is less than. We use this if we're trying to represent more than one quantity. So if on a number line, in the past we just had a circle and we drew it at a specific answer. Now it's going to say, well, it's this number and all the ones smaller than it as well. Okay. And it's an open circle, not a closed circle, because it wouldn't be including that point because it's just less than that number. Versus over here, this one is saying it's still a less than sign. Doesn't it look the same as this one? The only thing that's different is it has a line underneath of it. So if it has a line underneath, that means it's including that point as well. So I would shade it in, and it's to the left because that's where smaller numbers are, is to the left, right? And so this would say is less than or equal to. So the difference between these two is that it says or equal to because it's including that point. Just like for an equation, you know how you draw a closed-in circle at the solution? It's including that point and plus all the numbers smaller than it. Going the other way, this is a greater than sign because typically when we write things, we have our variables on the left, right? And so this, if you look at it, the little tiny end is pointing towards the variable. So it's representing all the values that are smaller than whatever number's over here. Here, the great big open end is facing your variable. So it's all the numbers that are greater than that number. So moving towards the positives. And again, it's an open circle because it's not including whatever number is right here. This one is still a greater than sign. It looks just like this one, doesn't it? But it has a line underneath. So it would be including that point and all the values greater than it. Okay, so this, you would know to put this sign if you see the term is greater than. Versus this one would still say is greater than, but also or equal to. So that or equal to is key. That means that I'm going to shade in that circle because it's also including that point as well. Now, those are the main ones, but there's a few others that they could say that mean the same thing. So to get this sign, the less than sign, it would say is less than, is fewer than, or very rarely they'll say it's below this value. So it's something, it could be a lot of different numbers so long as it's below this one. Like you can be below 12 years old in order to order off the kids menu. Yeah, they discriminate. Okay. For this one, some other values that mean is greater than. Another word for is greater than is more than. So you could say if it's more than something, you'd use a greater than sign, or is above. And then for is greater than or equal to and is less than or equal to, these ones have a little bit of a trick to it. Okay. Of course, if it said is more than or equal to, that would work for this one. If it says is fewer than or equal to, that would work for here. But I want to point out two that aren't as obvious as you would think. Okay. If I were to say is no more than, you would automatically jump to, oh, it's the greater than, right? Because more than sounds like this. Well, think about it this way. In order to get into Disneyland for free, you can be no more than 2 years old. So you would think, okay, all the numbers that are greater than or equal to 2. So 16-year-olds get in for free? No, they don't. Do you get in for free to Disneyland? No. Are you older than 2? No. So it's actually a less than or equal to sign, because 2-year-olds, they get in for free. And then all the values smaller than 2 get in for free to Disneyland, right? So 1-year-olds, babies, they get in for free. But the direction said no more than. And so that sounds like a more than sign, but it's actually a less than or equal to. So if it says is no more than, it's actually a less than or equal to sign, because it's including the value of 2, but it's also the values under 2. Because it's really obvious. The person checking in the gate, how do you tell the difference between a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old by looking at them? It's hard. But if you see a baby, it's really easy. They just wave them through. Yep, you're in for free. But it's really hard to tell. So they prefer younger, but sure, if you're exactly 2, you get in for free as well. The indicator that, because to me, I look at no more than, and I'm like, oh, it's a greater than sign. That no is what helps indicate it's the opposite way of what you think. So going the other way, what if I were to say is no less than? Well, again, you would think a less than sign, but where did I put it? In the greater than or equal to column. And you're like, how does that work? Well, remember, whenever you see the word no, it's the opposite way you think. Let's use the example of driving. Okay, so to drive, you need to be 16 years old, right? Can kids younger than 16 drive? No. You can't have a little 2-year-old behind the wheel driving a car. They can't even see over the steering wheel. That doesn't make sense. But can you have people older than 16 driving? You sure can. You can have 17, 18, 19, 20. Think of your parents' ages. I won't give any specifics in case they're watching this video, but their ages are more than 16 years old and they can drive, right? So it's all the values greater than 16. Now, can 16-year-olds drive? Yes. So it's including the 16-year-olds, and they prefer older. Okay. So if you see the word no less than, you can be no less than 16 years old in order to legally drive a car. It would actually be a greater than or equal to sign. The other one that's a little bit tricky, in my opinion, is if you see the word at. So if I said at most, where do you think that would go? Well, most, you would think less than, but because I just alerted you to the fact that it's the opposite of what you think, where do you think? Would it go in the less than column or the more than column? Most, you would think greater than, but it's actually the less than column. Okay, so if it's at most something, it's actually a less than. So you can be at most 2 years old in order to get into Disneyland for free. But the other ages are easier at getting in for free. If it's a big 2-year-old for their age, if you get a really strict person at the gate, they might not let them in. Okay, and then the same thing with is at least. You would think it would be a less than, but it's actually a greater than sign, because you have to be at least 16 years old to drive, meaning you can be equal to 16, but they prefer it to be older. So if ever you see the word no or at, it's the opposite way you think. In fact, why don't you put a little note to yourself right here? If you see the word at or no, it's the opposite you think. Because I see the word most and I'm like, oh, it's a greater than sign. But that at should be like alarm bell, opposite way you think. It's actually a less than or equal to sign. Okay. So no or at makes it the opposite way of what you think it is. And if you're ever up for doubt, like plug in, make up a scenario in your head, and then you'll see what makes most sense. Let's give some of these a try. Okay. If I'm writing an equation for this, right here, it says the capacity of an elevator is at most 12 people. When you're writing inequalities, I always like to put the variable on this side and the number I'm comparing it to on this side. Okay, so here I'm comparing it to 12 people and the capacity of the elevator. Well, it's at right there, so it's the opposite of what I think, meaning most I'd think greater than, but then it's probably a less than or equal to. Meaning you could have 12 people, but they'd prefer to have less people. Wouldn't you feel really nervous if there's like 12 people crowded on an elevator and you see a sign that says, at most 12, or then you're in danger of crashing to your death and plummeting. Yeah, you get a little nervous when there's 12 people, right? You'd feel much easier if there was 9, 8, 7 people on the elevator, right? Okay, let's try this one. A number n is decreased by 3. Okay, so a number n decreased by 3 is less than, that's just a normal is less than sign, 21. If you were asked to solve this to get n by itself, think of this like a normal equation. What would you do? To get n by itself, I would do the inverse of subtracting 3, which is to add 3, and then do the same thing to the other side. And now you have the variable by itself, bring down your inequality, and 21 plus 3 is 24. So its n is less than 24. That would be the solution. If they asked you to just write the equation, that's what it would be. Okay, now this one. There are no more than 60 people in the theater. So people and 60. No more than. Aha, did you catch that alarm bell word of no? So then you'd think a more than, but it's actually a less than or equal to. So you could have 60, but they said there's no more than that. So there probably is less than that. Okay, for the next one, you're talking about the temperature of the water and 72 degrees. And it just says it's above. So it's something higher than that. So what do you think? A greater than sign. Is it including that value? No, it says it's above it. So I just do a regular greater than sign, not a greater than or equal to. This one says a number m increased by, so added 7, is at least. So this means it's an inequality sign, and that at means it's the opposite way I think. So instead of a less than sign, it's actually a greater than or equal to 15, because it's including 15, but it's probably more than that because it's at least that. So it's that or maybe more. So greater than or equal to. And then to get m by itself, what do you do to this plus 7? Subtract 7. Those cancel. You have m by itself. Bring down your inequality. And 15 minus 7 is 8. Now, those rules that we were talking about for like which way the inequalities face, that's if the variable is on the left-hand side. And since you get to write the equation, always have it so that your variable is on the left side. And then the thing you're comparing it to, have on the right. And then it's easy to follow those rules up above that we talked about for choosing which sign to put in between. Now, if I were to graph these, put the number you're focusing on in the middle, one bigger, one smaller. If there's a line underneath, it's a closed circle. If there's no line underneath, it would be an open circle. And then I think of this inequality sign as my arrowhead when the variable's on my left. See how like it almost looks like an arrowhead facing that way? So it goes that way. And think about it. It's saying less than, where do numbers get smaller? To the left. This one is saying is less than, where do numbers get smaller? To the left. Or think of it like an arrowhead. It's pointing in that direction. Okay, here we have 60. So one bigger, one smaller. There's a line underneath, so shade in that circle. And where's the arrow pointing? To the left. So it's all the numbers less than 60. This one is focusing on 72. So one number bigger, one number smaller. And at 72 is an open or closed circle. Open because there's no line underneath. And then if this were like an arrowhead, see how it's pointing in that direction? So have your arrow going that way. Or it's the great big open end facing my variable. Where do numbers get bigger? To the right. And then finally, the last one, it's at 8. So at 8, should I shade it or leave it empty? I should shade it in because it's including the number 8 because of that line underneath. It's the great big open end facing my variable, so it's 8 and all the numbers larger than it. Also, since my variable's on my left, I could have used my arrowhead trick. So see how it looks like an arrow pointing in that direction? And there you go. Hopefully that helped you a little bit of determining which sign to write from a word problem, and also a little bit of help on how to graph. Congratulations, my little mathematicians. You have now mastered what I consider some of the hardest parts of inequalities.